Well, I guess I should start this presentation at some point.
I was going to
I like talking with you, Steve, though. I could do this. This is what we miss when we're not on campus.
Can I introduce you, Matthew?
Please do.
Well, it's just going to be a very brief introduction. I'm just saying we are ready to start this session, and this is Matthew Hoven, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and he has got a very interesting title, The New Technocrats and Computerized Domination of Professional Ice Hockey. Father David Bauer's response to selling out the spirit of Canadian hockey after the 1980 Lake Placid Olympics. I think I actually remember those Olympics, so, and not many people here do. So, take it away, Matthew.
Thank you. I know every American remembers, because what was the big thing that happened at the 1980 Lake Placid Games that had to do with hockey?
The miracle.
Miracle on ice, right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So that's a good lead into sport and faith. So it's too bad. I wish I could be in Nashville. When I said I was going to this conference last year, my wife said, I'm coming too. Would love to go to Nashville. We haven't been before, so we're missing it, but it's good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So let's get rocking here. This is the overview of the program. So I'm going to take you on historical background, a little bit of Canadian hockey and Father David Bauer, so you get a sense of it. Then I'm going to give you his thought, his philosophical responses to a technocratic hockey, he called it. And then finally, in the end, well, that technocratic hockey wins out, he loses. But to go through his thought, his thinking is important. When Eric Bain-Sabel this afternoon, that was a great session, and he was talking about a prophetic voice. Well, Father Bauer was a prophetic voice. He saw sport could be a means to engage values, but he was definitely bucking the system and pushing hard, and it was infused with Christian thought. So I thought people would enjoy it. In the bottom corner here, Steve gave a nice plug. This is the book we put out. It was astronomical, the pricing, but now it's in paperback. I think it's $36 now on paperback. So if you're interested, there's more information in the conference proceedings as well. So thanks for the conference for that. Bloomsbury, you get a 10% discount if you go through there. Good. So I'll first break down the historical background of Father Bauer and this 1980s national ice hockey team. This is an extension of muscular Christian ideals, but it's within a Catholic context. So we have I got two pictures here. The first one is when Father Bauer taught at a Catholic college in Toronto, and they won the junior championship, was for 20 to 17-year-olds about, and they won the national championship, a big deal. And then later on that decade, that was 1961, and then he made a team, a national team, the first team ever, players from across the country that would represent Canada at international tournaments, which was a big, I guess, a nationalistic move. And it was a big moment in Canadian hockey. And there he is. I got the red circles on him, but you can imagine, just, it's kind of strange. Why is a priest leading this? And do priests and religious people really get into hockey? It's a violent sport. It's a rough sport. What's going on? So we'll walk us through that. Oh, and I jumped ahead. Okay, so the basis of it. So at the bottom left, I've got a picture of the college. So this is St. Michael's College in Toronto, circa 1911. Father Henry Carr was a pillar at the college for several reasons, but one is that he brought sport into the college, into the mainstream. And as you can see here, they were winning national titles in football, American football, Canadian football, rugby, as well as ice hockey. And he was infusing sport with muscular Christian ideals. So very much like Northeastern boarding schools throughout the US, in the UK, it was bringing that. It was a little different because it was a Catholic school that had a little different take on faith. But it was a lot of the same gentlemanly ideals that we see in muscular Christianity around the turn of the century. So that's the basis of where Bauer's coming from. When he goes to St. Michael's, he plays there, he wins a national championship as a player and a coach. The teams ended because of junior hockey was becoming professionalized, and the priest there said we can't balance hockey and education. So Bauer leaves Toronto. He gets sent to Vancouver, and as soon as he arrives, people want to talk hockey with him. And in the end, he starts this national team down here. A color picture of it this time. Now, why this is important that we needed a new national team is that up until this time, Canada just sent local teams. So the Edmonton Mercuries, it was sponsored by Ford Mercury car company, and they would send a local team to the Olympics. Usually Canada win because we're really good at hockey. The problem was is that the Europeans and even those darn Americans were catching up. And we have here on the right hand picture a Soviet team from the late 1950s that started winning world championships. So the idea was that Canada needed to win again. And here Father Bauer had a group of young men who didn't play in the NHL, weren't professionals, could play in the Olympics, and would also get a university degree. So it was combining those ideals, those muscular Christian ideals, even in terms of an education. And this team went on for several years. It went throughout the 1960s representing Canada. Now, as was highlighted on that last slide, the team was disbanded in 1970. And the reason was it wasn't winning all the time, but everybody estimated how good the Europeans and that particularly the Soviets were getting. When Canada then set up what was called the Summit Series, this was between the Soviet Union and Canada in 1972. This is like, I guess in some ways it'd be comparable to the Miracle on Ice in terms of its importance in Canadian hockey, but historically, culturally, it's like a major event in Canadian 20th century history. So we have NHL players, professionals, being able to play the best team in the Soviet Union. Canada wins. This is a game, the series winning goal at the very end of the series in Moscow, scored by Canadian Paul Henderson. But the amazing part was that Canada lost a lot of the games and they barely squeaked through with a win. So there were a lot of questioning of the Canadian hockey system. Are we really that good at hockey? Do we just think we are? Because those Soviets were pretty darn good. And so Canada's a little leery. So what happens is we start thinking, well, we got to engage more sports sciences. We got to be more of a rational approach to hockey like the Soviets. Now, as the decade progresses, Canada wants to have like a World Cup of hockey, which they end up calling the Canada Cup. And in order for European teams in the US to join it, Canada commits to joining the World Championships and the Olympics. So they'll go to the 1980s, so they'll need to send a team there. But to the World Championships, they send a team finally in 1977. So they were out of these World Championships for 8 years. And they were thugs. Canadians were tough. They were taking penalties. They were beating up people. It was bad news. So the violence was on full display and a lack of skill. And so this is problematic for Canadian hockey. So just to finish up, this historical background. So Bauer is put in charge. Father David Bauer, then, he's put in charge of the national team going into the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid. So here's his moment. And what he saw it as, yeah, I'm taking the team to 1980, but we're building a whole program. And we're going to build this to the 1984 Sarajevo Games and then to the 1988 Games. One thing to note about Bauer is I've written a book, I've submitted it. I'm just waiting to hear back from a publisher. Hopefully they accept it. But Bauer was a hockey philosopher. So he brought those traditional muscular Christian values to the game, and he's trying to understand what do these mean in the 1960s and 70s and now into the 80s? As sport changes, as society changes, what does this look like? What role can sport have on the national level to promote values and promote a Canadian way of life? That's the historical background. Now I'm going to switch into the philosophical responses by Bauer. Just getting some sun reflecting. It's so bright in my room right now. Okay, so that was part B, the historical. Here's the philosophical. Now, just to take us back to Father Carr, right, in the early 1900s, he sets up this sporting tradition with the Basilian Fathers, this religious community that Father Bauer belongs to. And it has these sporting ideals, but it comes across attention with what Bauer calls the new technocrats. These are folks that are concerned with sporting performance to the neglect of the well-being of the athlete. All right, so this is going to touch on themes today, I think, about like chaplaincy, well-being of athletes. I think of just a critique. There's pressure on kinesiology departments, for instance, to get grants, to somehow make a hockey stick that shoots a puck a little harder, faster, more accurate. There's these pressures, and Bauer's critiquing a system that is becoming more scientific. So take it as a historical thing, but it might be something that will jar you and make you think about your own circumstances. Okay, so the basis for Bauer's vision of the national team. Bauer admitted that the highest priority in 1980 shouldn't be about winning gold medals at any cost, but what is of the greatest of importance is to develop young people who come through this Olympic program with mental and moral conditioning. So we wanted the physical, the skills to improve, but it was about the whole person. He relies on this Soviet dissident who came over to the West in the U.S., Solzhenitsyn, and in reading his thought, Bauer says he wanted to ensure that hockey players received a well-rounded education upon Western ideals of freedom and morality, as opposed to that of the communist Soviet Union, which he saw at the time as very inhumane and not endorsing freedoms that Western democracies held. And he's thinking of this in terms of the 1960s team. He had all these players come through the national team in the 60s, and many of them now were doctors, lawyers, and teachers. And he said they had careers, they had a broader vision of the world. They weren't just narrow-minded hockey people, but they saw hockey in a larger context. And that's what he's promoting. The practical problem that he's facing, and violence is one thing, but the other one that he fights about, which hasn't been recorded very much, if at all, is how hockey's becoming scientific. All right. And he sees it an overemphasis on technique, on training. So George Lariviere, he's a Hockey Canada director. That's the national body of hockey, international hockey at that time. And he's a professor at the University of Montreal. So he explains to reporters how the new Olympic program was different from past teams. So this is Lariviere. In Canada, we have this elite hockey players, but no elite hockey training program. This is what we want to install. Okay. And he's talking, this is what he wants to do to the national team that Bauer started. Putting our best hockey players together does not necessarily mean we're going to win. We will put able hockey players together for a 3 to 4 year period and subject them to elite training program. Okay. So this was going to be a hockey hothouse for talent. So within Canada, sport is changing. It's taking on more professional structures. It's focusing more on performance. It's concerned about Canada's political status and how sport can influence politics and world standing. And so Bauer sees part of this technicalization of hockey as leading away from those original roots in sport that he supported. So Lariviere, then, this is still the problem Bauer's facing. This is Bauer's reaction. George Lariviere was technicizing a human art form, which should be a spontaneous activity of persons. Now, it's neat. He's talking about ice hockey as a human art form, okay? Not just Sovietized in a check pattern of already dangerous drift toward a standardized system, which automatizes and therefore is alien and in fact kills the human spirit. He's worried that we become so performance-based, we kill the human spirit. Efficient systems of production within society change the people playing the game, thought Bauer. For example, there's this neat example. Lariviere, this is on the Hockey Canada website, talks about placing radio receivers in players' ears so coaches could relay to players what can be said. Now, it's one thing when that's done in the NFL, when quarterbacks are in a huddle and need to play, but hockey's a free flow game. Like, to be telling people, like when the puck's zinging around, it's a fast game. there's no breaks in play hardly. It didn't make sense. But here, that's what Bauer's concerned. That's the direction. Le Riviere, the experiment didn't work, and he says the players felt like robots. They just did what their coach was telling them to do instead of reacting to the game. And Bauer thought there's a quality about reaction, a human quality within the sport that was being missed. So Bauer questioned a rational approach to hockey. Was hockey only about execution and performance, or was it also about a test of character? And he was afraid that players were going to become like guinea pigs within the team. And so, of course, he starts distrusting the hockey system because he's worried about what's happening and how it's treating players. In Bauer's in his philosophical response to what he saw in the technocratizing of sport, of hockey in particular, he lays out different arguments. So where I've drawn my research from is from different letters, notes that he wrote that I've gone through archives, speeches that he's given, books that he had, and even bibliography he listed. Or sometimes he'd write people and actually take a quote and say it and reference different authors. So that's where I'm going here in the next few slides. So Bauer claims there needs to be a proper balance. So he writes that empiricism, the science of manipulation, needed to be balanced with the science of understanding, that is wisdom, religion, and a philosophy of first principles. Right now, he's drawing this from a philosopher, early middle of 20th century, Jacques Maritain, a Frenchman, where the manipulation of things eventually become the manipulation of people. Some of these phrases, I just find them so impactful. The manipulation of things eventually becomes a manipulation of people. Without counterbalancing the science of manipulation, Bauer warned that it leads to human disaster if spiritual values are abandoned, as has happened in the world in general, the West in particular. So again, he sees the human person, developing persons, people, is a central part of sport, or should be at least. Okay, a few of the philosophers that he relies on. One is an English historian and philosopher, Christopher Dawson. And Dawson writes about spiritual values at the heart of European society of the West and how they're being upended. And he complains that the advance of scientific technology may have made it possible to create calculating machines and mechanical brains. Now, this is written in the 1950s, right? But there will never be a machine for the creation of moral values. Dawson adds, the last word in human affairs always belongs to the spiritual power that transcends both the order of nature and the order of culture, and gives human life its ultimate meaning and purpose. So these aren't narrow-minded religious fanatics or fundamentalists. These are philosophers and thinking, just saying that our morals and values, wisdom, these things need to balance out the scientific approach, right? There needs to be a balancing, and Bauer's afraid that balance is being lost. Bauer's critique against a rise of technical-driven hockey, it entrusts itself to advancements of skill and know-how, often in the absence of recognizing moral, spiritual order, and that gives meaning to human people. All right, another person Bauer relies on is philosopher Jacques Ellul. And Ellul has a couple pages that Bauer copied and he printed out and that he passed around to people, I'm assuming. And he says, a technically driven civilization, real play and enjoyment, contact with air and water, improvisation and spontaneity all disappear. That is, the spirit of human beings is replaced when training in sport makes of the individual an efficient piece of apparatus, which is henceforth unacquainted with anything but the harsh joy of exploiting his body in winning. When specialized technical education becomes central to human activity, Ellul argued, harmony and joy and the realization of spiritual good are pushed aside in sport, and nothing gratuitous is allowed to exist because it's so focused on performance. I think of the Christian idea of grace, and grace is when we receive something we haven't earned and it's just freely given to us. In this Bauer's scene of sport, he's worried that there is nothing gratuitous in it. There's no grace in it. This shift changes the human person. Its mechanisms reach into the individual's innermost life, working a transformation of his body and its motions as a function of technique, not as a function of some traditional end or foreign to technique, which would be like friendship, peace, joy, that these are valuable ends as well in sport. He adds elsewhere, Bauer, that such a technical environment creates a place where persons increasingly feel under threat and become victims of an oppression that deprives them of interior freedom. So as our sporting systems become more rational, become more professionalized, he's seeing that these other values are being lost, and they're focused on efficiencies, on productivity, on victory. And here in the last bold part, I put the resulting new structures of control often gave the sense of inevitability to a rational framework because efficiency and results orientation become unrivaled values in the system. That's all that matters, that whatever else sport can do is forgotten about. Here, Bauer also relies on a friend of his, Marshall McLuhan. He was a media studies person, kind of a guru in the 60s. Ever heard the phrases, the medium is a message and the global village? Well, McLuhan wrote these. A Canadian, actually, from Alberta here, but was a professor in Toronto. And in light of that, of McLuhan's work, Bauer wrote, he criticized violence in hockey. The Canadian hockey system has made a serious mistake in the past decade or so by advocating beating up the other fellow, using size and strength to wear him down, and taking control of the game instead of that art form I talked of earlier. Bauer worried that this gave our young people a kind of automated response mechanism, both of those who play the game to those who look up to hockey stars as heroes. To me, it's like what Marshall McLuhan said when he talked of the effect of mass media on the minds of people. They lose the ability to think and reason for themselves. They go out on the ice and do their best to play within a system that tells them to interfere and intimidate the opponent, so that the technology in the mass media is having an impact. Two ways that Bauer is seeing this, I'll just say the highlighted parts. Bauer's behaviors such as intimidation trample on people's individualism, all right, that you can't be yourself within the game. And the second point, players came to accept automatically that violence and not human freedom and moral goodness undergirded hockey and human communities. That somehow hockey as a sport was meant to develop people, allow them to flourish, allow them to become better people, learn about their communities and their world. Instead, he's afraid that hockey's based on violence, and that's what people are seeing and following. Okay, I think I got a few minutes left. This is this is my last bit, and this is based on that kind of philosophical thinking. Bauer gives a speech to coaches prior to the 1980 Lake Placid Games. So I'm taking here from that speech in his own words to wrap things up. So against this larger background, Bauer he speaks about war, famine, economic crisis, violence. He tries to paint this picture of our societies in crisis. People need to wake up. And he says, according to Bauer, he says, we must be loyal to the truth, to our friendships, and we must strive to create an environment in which an athlete can continue to grow as a human person. We'll become better coaches and better people if we hold to this. The reason we are in sport and coaching is not merely to learn that the philosophy and techniques of the game and make professional hockey players. Rather, we believe and hope we have something more to give young people. So Bauer critiqued technical advancements in the training of the Olympic team that place know-how ahead of human values. He wrote, "It strikes me that in a game of hockey, we also can go overboard in simply learning technique and forgetting other contributions that Canadians have made to hockey. Science, engineering, technology produce know-how, but know-how is nothing by itself. It is a means without an end. The task of education would be to stress the idea of human value, of spirit, and how to find new meaning in our lives." And then he quoted a famed Montreal Canadiens player. I got to give that team a shout out. They're in the Stanley Cup semifinals. "I was taught that the stick was for passing, for taking a pass, shooting, and scoring. But after observing this year's Stanley Cup series in 1979, we've learned it turned out to be an instrument of intimidation." Bauer exclaimed, "We put know-how ahead of value." So the result of giving know-how priority was that the whole of mankind is in mortal danger. More technique, more education can only help us if we develop the love of truth and the ability to discern and make wise decisions. I skip down. To help each person, we have to have a positive image in interdiscipline, a sense of loyalty and responsibility to themselves and society. So he says that we need to set up coaching clinics and make us think about sport. We need to become awakened to certain priorities. We're primarily responsible for evolving that human dynamism, which we call the energies of the human person, right? For every player. And players should be able to say why they play their sport, not just because they've been doing it for the last 10 years. So we have two paths that Bauer paints in the speech. Either you're on this technological driven path, rational sport, where it's about performance, or do you put priority on the development of people, which can be driven about performance too, but what's your priority? What's in first place? In the end, Bauer loses out. That summer of 1980, after the team is reconfigured. An emphasis is put on the scientific training. It becomes a hothouse for hockey talent. The NHL is able to cherry pick the talent from the 1980 team, and it has this new system of for talent. And Bauer's on his out. And that's it. Thanks for your time.
We have time for a few questions. Does anyone in our audience, both remote or in the room, have questions for Matthew?
Yeah, hi. I'd love to, thanks, Matthew, for that. I'm one of your fellow Canadians next door in Saskatchewan.
Absolutely, Lori. Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. I really appreciated the presentation. What I found interesting is, first of all, you mentioned Paul Henderson winning the final goal. I'm a long-suffering Leafs fan, so I have to mention that he won. He had the winning goal in game 6, 7, and 8, which you probably know. It was more than just that final miracle goal. So I think the proudest Leafs moment we've had in decades. The other thing is that's really hopefully encouraging for you, because I really appreciated, Father Bauer. I know a little bit about him. We've got on our campus a high school as well as college and seminary, and you might be encouraged to hear. We're a Canada hockey sports skills school. We started with one team about 4 years ago, went to 2 teams, and now we're expanding to 4. And the thing that is encouraging is that the owner is trying to do this by having values teaching. So Wednesday afternoons, the guys all go through a program that called Humble Strong, that was established in 2016, a company that's delivering values-based teaching. So addressing some of these things to help them understand who they are in Christ. Not all of these boys come and have a faith, but many of them are coming to faith. But they're really emphasizing this whole understanding of moral teaching in the midst of really high performance technical training, on our campus. So that's just an encouraging note that, there is some efforts to still try to do that. One thing that really sticks out is we had a mom come to a presentation. They were checking the program out for their son, and she came up in tears at the end of the program. And her husband had played in the NHL and was in his 40s, and just thanked them so much when they did the Humble Strong presentation. She said, my husband's lost 3 friends to suicide because post-professional hockey, they felt worthless and it had no value. I just wondering if you can speak to that. Maybe those are players that have come through this technical training, or what's the connect maybe with them being like robots or machines, and then once they're done, they just don't know who they are as a person.
Yeah, great, Lori. I'll mention the Humble Strong. I'd seen their value statement, but I didn't know of an organization or like a teaching that went along with it. So that's really, it's helpful to know that. And then this idea about what the system's doing. Well, I can just speak from Father Bauer's point of view, and that was again and again, it's simply about getting kids, the best players, to play in the NHL. And a lot of kids are sacrificed on the altar of hockey in our country in junior A, junior B hockey, all the way down at whatever age level, because there's this mentality that the kid needs to get to the NHL. And that's what hockey is about. And that's its underlying values. And so when somebody fails out or when they have success in it, when it's all over, they have nothing, they have nothing else. And I like Father Bauer's point is that sport should open people up. It should broaden their horizons. It shouldn't narrow them. It shouldn't make them less, or it should open them to new communities, new people, give them a place to foster community and know others and to grow themselves, you know. So like for Bauer, it wasn't, he's dealing on the national level, so he can't be overtly Christian and faith, openly about his faith, but it's just he's questioning those guiding principles. And you know, today's sport's a little different than in Bauer's time because it's a lot more. We live in a globalized world with the media as well. Like it's shifted some, and so in some ways, sport is being kinder to athletes, but still, this underlying philosophy, I think, is at work. Thanks a lot, Lori.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I want to know who your favorite hockey team is. NHL.
There's just no question. Well, it can't be the Maple Leafs. I wouldn't do that to myself. That's just like, you know, that's sackcloth and ashes there. Oilers, Connor McDavid, we're coming on, baby. We'll take down those Nashville Predators in the playoffs next year.
We'll see about that. Anyone else have a question? Well, thank you for the great presentation.
Nope. Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can, Andy.
Dr. Hoven, thanks again. It's I've seen you present on this topic now for several years, and it's really great to just see the depth that this is really starting to get at. You know, those papers, that time you spent in the archives really, I think, has paid off, and you really are getting a sense of who he was from his own perspective. I know you knew what it was, but now you got the data to show it. And so I guess my question is, did David Bauer, Father Bauer's prognosis come true? And then kind of building off of Lori's insight, is there a natural reaction to that can't just be robots and there will be a natural the pendulum the other way to a more holistic, more philosophical approach to the sport of hockey? Thanks again.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I guess what struck me about reading these speeches, I would get excited reading them. I'm like, this is gold. Like as a researcher, I loved it. And just as a hockey fan, I just, you see it in hockey. There's major issues within the sport. And just like other sports where we get, you know, professionalization coming down further and further at younger levels, and the pressures on kids, and it's happening. And in some ways, when we read more sport history on it, it feels like really nothing has changed. These pressures have been there on kids, and we have that, and we're just not willing to budge on it. I think what I guess what I hope my project is about, and what Father Bauer is that I think a lot of people that are calling for change, I might be able to put on the politically left side of the spectrum. And Father Bauer is not a politically left dude. Like he's maybe central or leaning right. But what he saw fundamentally was this: what are we doing to our young people? What are we doing to families? Like, and as much as he got critiqued about being this do-gooder and all about these ideas and a philosopher, it was so practical. He just asked, what is this doing to people? What's happening to players? And like Lori's examples about what's the suicide rates of hockey players afterwards, the mental health, marriages breaking up. it's just one thing after another. And nobody wants to wake up to the truth. And I find that in that one speech I read, like he uses the word even awaken, which is a very biblical word, a Christian word, but we often hear it in kind of more left-leaning circles about, are you awoke or are you awake? But it's not just for the lefties. It's for a lot of faith-based people that are concerned about the direction of sport. And I think a lot of people at this conference, obviously. Thanks for your question, Andy.
Thanks, Matt. Great work.
Thanks, buddy.
Anyone else have a question for Matthew? All right, thank you for, go ahead.
I'll ask one. Hey, Matthew, this is Landon Huffman from Johnson University here. Thanks again for your time. Just echo everyone. My background is in sport management, and I'll ask a question, kind of tongue in cheek. So facilities or universities like Lipscomb here who might be investing in labs and research, how do you respond to this then?
Yeah, part of what Bauer was going through like we had, I don't know this history as well, but through the 60s and 70s, that's where we see a shift from faculties of phys ed into kinesiology. And we see that change, and that was a major shift to sport too. Like it had deeper ramifications in the sport. And, there was a chance he started to try to grow a program about, it was going to be sport and human development, and he was going to run it out of a school not too far from Laurie, Wilcox, in Wilcox, Saskatchewan. And he started it because I don't think he wanted to go to big universities, because he didn't like what was going on in kinesiology departments. Now, Bauer would say it's just a balance, that you need to have the science and empiricism, but you need to have the science of wisdom as well. And right now, it's out of whack, that we're really not listening to that wisdom. When I talk to hockey players, they were always like, well, he was kind of advanced hockey thinker in the 60s, but by the 70s, he was being surpassed by other people. So he was becoming dated. But as I think about that, sometimes those, the traditionalists in the sport are getting at something really core and of value, and I think it's worth listening to. Did I get kind of at your question, Landon?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. It's good to hear your voice, Landon.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I'm just wondering if you're familiar at all with Fred Mason's work at University of New Brunswick.
That name sounds familiar.
He did a great paper. Yeah, he did a really nice paper, presented it in 2010, I think. It was called Losing Ground in the Run Towards Science, the Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and Kinesiology. I think you've touched on it a couple of times, where we've run from the humanities, social sciences, gone more science-based. And I believe, it's been a few years since I read it, but I think the whole thing is we've gone to where the grant money is in the sciences often, and that switched from the phys ed, which was maybe more general, more holistic, to the kinesiology, the exercise science, to have these high performance humans. Just kind of curious if you know of Fred's work, or
I don't. That's really helpful. This was all new to me again. I didn't study in faculties of sport or kinesiology. And what I had a conversation with Scott Kretschmar, and he was talking about sport philosophy. And he said, now there's more sport philosophers outside of sporting departments than there are inside. And he said, there's just no funding for it. And so there's more sport philosophers than ever, but it's more outside. And he said the funding, where more of the money is, that's where the faculties and departments are gravitating towards, which, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but boy, do we got to think about our values and check in with that.
Yeah, great work. This has been really interesting. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you for that question. Anyone else? All right, we'll be beginning the next session at 10 minutes after 4, and thank you for a great presentation, Matthew.